Are you looking for a podcast where you can hear from real people regarding their real dental drama? If so, then you've come to the right place. Join hosts Bethany Petty and Dr. Reena Kuba as we dive into the solutions we've created and the mistakes we've made while managing dental drama. Let's get started. All right, welcome back. Today we are going to kind of circle back to one of our initial podcast topics. We spent our first couple topics talking about just kind of the difficult employee market and things that we're having to do to be a little bit more creative. But I want to dive into the subject of creative employee retention strategies. I feel like you and I have done some really out of the box types of things with some of your employees when they got to a point where they were thinking they either had to leave the practice or needed to move on to a different career or something like that. And this has come up not only with you lately, but with a lot of clients just going, how could I be creative and retain this employee so that I'm not down a person?
Well, and you had mentioned too that we've talked about remote employees.
Yes.
And that we needed to come back and talk more about that. So that could tie into today as well.
Absolutely. Because that's another area that you've really capitalized on remote employees. And that's not a concept that most dentists really think about. So I want to definitely dive into that as well. So I thought we could start with what are some examples that you can even think of in your practice where you had an employee that was either telling you they needed to leave or maybe they needed to move, or just kind of give us some examples of when this popped up in your practice.
Sure. And I can think of, so not exactly in that vein, but my first remote employee and why and how that came to fruition.
Yeah.
And then the next big one I think about is one of my team leads that's been with me since I started the practice. And so that one might be one that there's a lot of considerations in that one and the way things could have gone. So I'll start with the first one, the remote one. And it wasn't about retaining her. She's somebody who I had worked with the first associate position I took. So she was their AR person in that office. And we all shared an office, myself, my boss, Doc, and then this AR person. We all shared this tiny little office. So I got to know her pretty well there. And then when we did I think we all went to a TDA meeting or a AAPD, maybe AAPD was in San Antonio, something like that. So she went. And so I got to know her more just as a person and humor and jokes. And we are both very different in our religion and politics and life goals and all of that, right? But we hit it off. And so we got to be really good friends back when we both worked for the other office. Well, the same year I left that practice to start my own, she moved back to Oklahoma. She was from the Tulsa area and her family was there and she got land there. And so she moved from Texas up to, North Oklahoma. And so that was that. Well, then when I was starting my practice and trying to figure out dentrix and figure out billing and, I did my own billing. I wasn't trained to do that. And so all of the nuances that come with that, I would reach out to her and say, hey, can you help me with this? Or what are your thoughts on this? And all of that. Fast forward a year or 2 or 3 into the practice. At one point I called her and I said, as the years went by, I talked to her less and less because I was figuring out my way and she was I think she got out of dental for a little while. And then she ended up back in dental, not in a pediatric office, but wherever she was. And I had some random question and I thought, you know what, she might know this. So I called her and we caught up and we hadn't talked in a while. And I said, so as we're getting off the phone, I was like, I miss you. I wish we could work together. Like, damn you for moving to Tulsa. Any thoughts on moving to Irving? Like, come on, like, do this with me. And she laughed and she's like, oh, I wish I could, but my family's here and whatever. And I got off the phone with her and I thought, why couldn't we do this remotely? And mind you, I know nothing about tech. So I had no idea what that would entail or how we would go about it. All I knew is I use LogMeIn to log into my charts later. Now, of course, we've got Weave and all these other things that I still don't know all the ins and outs of. I still go by LogMeIn because that's what I was trained to do. And that's how but I was like, well, couldn't she just have a LogMeIn account and log in and do this? So I called her and I said, you mentioned that you would love to work with us and you're not super happy in your position now. And what do you think about this? Like, is there any reason this couldn't work? Because, if you had a phone, you could call about billing, you send statements, so we could still make this work. And she doesn't know a lot about technology either, but we both were like, we weren't really seeing a lot of roadblocks in there. And I think what really worked for me was I trusted her.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So even today, if we all talk about, we're like, well, we could give this person some remote work, and we all pause and hesitate because we've got to really know the person to know that they're going to be ethical and they're not going to be sleeping when they should be talking on the
right.
to pay, So it's like all those things. So that was one. Before her, actually, I had a kind of a marketing person. That's a podcast for another day. Again, looking for talent outside of dentistry. So that's a good one I've got to come back to another time. But she also was one that I rarely saw. I gave her pretty much free rein to say, hey, but I knew she was busy and working because I'd get all these emails. I'd see things that she was working on. I'd see things set on the calendar. So I knew she was being ethical and a hard worker and all of that. So anyway, fast forward to this AR person. So she came aboard and we just kind of figured out, called our IT people, and it took a little bit, but then she took over all the AR stuff and it just worked beautifully.
Yeah. It is one of the easiest positions on the team for it to be done remotely. There really isn't a super big advantage to that person being in the office. I mean, I have plenty of clients that have their AR person in the office. That's the norm for sure. And that person is always tucked into some little closet or some little room. Like even in the office, we're trying to find a way to get them kind of away from everything because it's one of those jobs that you really want to focus. And it's hard once you get into the nitty gritty of inputting payments. You don't want to be 10 cents off and then you're digging for that later. And so we tend to, even when they're in the office, we're like, oh, we need to find this little bitty quiet space for this person. So why not? It makes total sense for that to be remote, especially with all of the technology capabilities nowadays. There's really not a need for that person to be in the office if they're specifically focusing on insurance, AR, etc. So I do feel like this is one of the few remote positions that's kind of a no-brainer that maybe a lot of people haven't considered it being remote anymore. But I think with the environment that we're in, I mean, think about this conversation that you had with this employee. You trusted her, you knew her. I mean, fast forward to right now. What if you had this gaping need in your practice where you're like, I got to have somebody working on my finances and stuff? It's even more of a valid idea right now because you could absolutely, there's people that you've worked with or friends that have moved away that you're like, the United States is your plate now. Like you can pick from anywhere as long as they have access to the system. So I think it's a strategy we've got to think about now.
Well, so the other thing is because of technology, and again, I think it's Weave, that she does, for the most part, she does log in at normal hours.
Yeah.
And she can, I mean, she's right. It's like we're talking to her. Mm-hmm. It's like I'm talking to somebody who's physically in the front desk because I don't walk up to the front desk. We've messaged them.
Yeah.
And so we've messaged on it. And I think she likes the interaction. I mean, I think she'd love some days face to face, but I think she loves being, she's not missing the jokes and the interactions that we have over Weave. She comes down 3, 4, 5 times a year for our team building stuff. And if we have meetings, we FaceTime her in. So it's actually just worked really well. And I think she's super happy because she doesn't spend money on gas. If she wants to clock in the evening, she's one of our salaried people, not hourly. Mm-hmm. And her kids are older. So, I mean, it just worked. I can't think of one thing that I think the only thing I'm afraid of is when she decides to retire or quit or whatever, then it's like, what am I going to do? I'm so spoiled.
When you know that it's a good situation when that's your worst case scenario, you're like, she's going to leave eventually or retire eventually. I think one of the things that I wanted to point out that you just said is that she's still involved with the team culture. So I think that's important with a remote worker. We don't want them to feel so isolated on an island on their own that they're disconnected from the inner workings of the practice. And because like our last podcast showed that we're really passionate about team building events, we want her to be included on those, and that keeps her connected with the team. Not to mention meetings. She's very involved in all of those because there are things that, from her perspective, the team needs to know about from a billing or claim perspective. And so her voice is heard in those. So still very much connected, but not necessarily physically present.
So to piggyback off the team building part, yes, I do. When she comes to town, yes, I get her a hotel room. I pay for that. Mm-hmm. And then she comes to team building. And a lot of times she'll pop in the office just to meet and greet and see if she can see if there are any workflow issues that may be contributing to why the team hasn't given her the information she needs to submit the claim, etc. So she kind of touches base then. But I don't cheap out on that. I want to make sure that she has an opportunity to come down. Mm-hmm. A lot of times she stays with me in my home. My girls mm-hmm. love her. So not that you have to get to that. That's probably a topic, how far do you get involved in your team? But I already knew her. She was already, she'd already stay at my house before she worked for me. So it's a different relationship. But we are careful about making sure that both of our needs are met mm-hmm. and that we're not crossing those boundaries. And but I value her, and it's also one less person I've got to on a day-to-day, you okay, or how's this, or so-and-so said this to you, or you made this face, and so I don't have to deal with all that. It's one less person in the office. And it's one less like physical space in the office.
That's exactly what I was about to say. Even in your office, I feel like we've really tried to maximize the amount of space as best we can. But even though there is technically a computer that she could be at, it would be cumbersome for her to be there in the office. It's almost better for the office that she's not in the office just due to space itself.
Well, and the conversations that AR has to have on the phone with billing and all of that. So we got her a phone. And again, I think through Weave or whatever technology we have, that it's just another phone. It's not another line. I don't know how all of that works, but basically she's got a phone on her end. Mm-hmm. The phone rings. Mm-hmm. Like when the phone rings in the office, it's ringing at her home. So she knows that if the phone goes, I think on the fourth ring, it hasn't been answered, then she answers it. So it's almost like magic. Like somebody's there just taking care of it. It's so wonderful. Nice. It's wonderful.
One of the things I will say on remote positions, when I have brought this as an option to practice owners, I think there's this general fear, to your point earlier, that this person is not going to be as productive, as effective. There's this trust factor, I think, that comes into play. And so I want to caution anybody who's listening to this that first and foremost, you need to have, I wouldn't do a job post for a remote position worker. That's too much risk, in my opinion. You had a relationship with this lady. Really, all of our remote people that we'll get to, we have a relationship with them before they're remote. But also, if we have a relationship, so we've selected that person because they are trustworthy, they're dependable, loyal, all of that. When they shift remote, I don't want there to be this perception that all of a sudden now they're going to have all this excess time. So one of the conversations that I can think about with one of my clients is they were like, oh, okay, great. She's going to be remote now. So now she's going to have all this additional time because I get the concept. She's not being interrupted and all of that.
And she's not driving.
Driving, et cetera, et cetera. I think we've got to be really careful on that because where we might make up for efficiency, she really is. She's kind of in the zone, especially your person with AR. She can be in her zone. She can be very efficient with what she's getting done. At the same time, there's internet issues. There's times where, we're having tech issues on her, being able to log in, or maybe it's just running slowly for whatever reason. So where we might carve out, 10% more efficiency, there is going to be maybe 10% less efficiency just because of that remote situation. Not to mention, there is a little bit more effort that she has to make on her part to stay connected. So maybe if she's in the office, she's not reading every single inner office message that comes through because she's hearing about it and she doesn't necessarily have to. Well, she's needing to be connected to the practice. So she's reading all of those. She's getting on the phone when something's confusing to her, with team members. So while it's a very effective and efficient position, it's not that they're going to have this plethora of time now that's all miraculously available to them. So just because they go remote doesn't mean that we need to add so much more to their plate to make it makes sense to the practice
And
owner's
I
mind.
remember having to try to figure out and finesse that too. It's the same as if they were in the office, honestly. So I think that's one thing. The other thing you just said, oh, I'm gonna have to come back to it.
Okay. While you're thinking on it, one other thought that I would throw in too, just to make it clear on what this remote person does for you. So somebody listening is like, what would a remote accounts receivable person do? Just to give some nuts and bolts here, your particular accounts receivable person files the claims. And
so yes, to add to that, we open the mail, obviously comes to us, then we scan it into a shared folder on the server. She accesses it.
Yep, that's exactly where I was going.
Okay.
The nuts and bolts of it. So she has, we're not having to, one of the questions, well, do we just bag up all the EOBs and send them to, no. You can still do that all electronically. Now, I do have one client that has a remote worker, a similar situation to one that we'll talk about. This lady had been in the office. Man, she was a workhorse. She understood the insurance AR. She was on top of it, but she was a front desk person that needed to move to East Texas, like, 2.5 hours away or so. And so we were like, oh, we hate to lose this person. We had that same conversation. She can do this remote. Yes, we're down a person at the front. So this was a 2-person front desk team. And now we're losing a body. But the practice had grown to a point where it made sense that she could take this on. And would she be gaining substantially more time because she's not running the check-in seat? Absolutely. So then we added verification to her plate and put a few little extra things on her because she physically wasn't going to be really answering the phone, checking patients in, etc. Now, she actually comes into the office once a week because she's only 2.5 hours away. She drives in every Friday. She spends some time at the office. She mails statements from the office. She collects the checks at that time so that she processes them through the week. So hers is an actual physical, she takes the checks with her, or the EOB is not the checks. She takes those with her. But if your person's in New York and you're in Texas, that's obviously not an option. This is Oklahoma and Texas, like your example that we're talking about. So we've come up with more of an immediate option where those things are scanned in. She's able to immediately access those and then, of course, apply the payments.
The thing I was going to say, and we talked about this in one of the other podcasts about the audit.
Yeah.
So when you're saying she's got to work to stay connected, so yeah, you've got to have somebody with good work ethic to do this because they almost have to be a self-starter.
Mm-hmm.
And so because she's not in the office to hear the conversations or to hear what the parents said when they walked in, you have to leave good notes for her. Mm-hmm. And from a clinical team side, when she's sending off the billing, normally in an office, if she was in the building, she could walk around to the assistant and say, blah, 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 blah. Well, she can't do that here. So the assistant better give her the crumbs she needs to put it together. And so that's what we were talking about, an inadvertent audit, because she's physically not in the building. Everything needs to line up such that she feels like she was in the building.
Which is a side benefit to the remote position because it forces that level of documentation where we're not depending upon a verbal conversation about this. She's literally bound to whatever is documented in the system is what she has to go off of. So it is advantageous from that angle to know that the only information she has is what's documented in the system, and that creates that inadvertent audit. So yeah, I wanted to just make sure that listeners know Dr. Kuba's remote person handles all of the incoming EOBs, puts that in anything that got denied or that's pending from insurance. She follows up with those things. She also physically, if I'm not mistaken, physically sends the claims at the end of each day, adding all necessary attachments. She also does our insurance verification. So those are, and then of course managing account statements, sending statements and following up on
And that's what I thought about too. Do I need to buy her a stamp machine? Do I send her envelopes? Like, what do I need to do? But most of ours, I think we use maybe through Dentrix. I don't even remember anymore. But some service,
it's electronic, yeah.
So it's worked out very well for us.
Yeah. So I think that's a perfect example to start with. And to me, it's one of the easiest for a practice owner to imagine a remote person doing that. Obviously, they are dealing with financials. But if they're not physically taking the check with them, or we're not physically sending them the check, it's relatively low risk, to be perfectly honest, from protecting the assets and all of that. So I think this is a great opening position to start with. But that's not where we ended. We've got several more to talk about on your team. So that's the first one you thought of. What's the second remote position that you?
The second one that we've already talked about in another one, and it's a quicker one, so I'll kind of recap that here. She had moved from South Carolina, worked with us for about a year. We all loved her. Then she wanted to move back to South Carolina to be back with family again. And this is the classic, oh man, we love her. And then it was, well, could she stay in a remote capacity? And because we already had the other AR person, we'd already kind of figured out the nuances of what this would entail. And so, yes, we were losing a body at the front desk. So then we had to figure out who we were plugging into that spot. But as far as what she could do remotely, did we have enough to give her the hours she needs? And the answer was yes. And so at that time when we took Medicaid, and it was this whole, like, all the OR pre-auths and all the scheduling. I mean, it was a whole, we literally had 2 extra people to have to handle all of the Medicaid stuff. And so she did all of that remotely, because it was all paperwork type stuff. Send this, email this to the hospital, email this back to the office. And then the other beauty that I loved was that she was the first one on phones. And so all of the phone ringing in the office pretty much went away because she was the one handling it. And so it really became, I think she was first on phones, then AR was next on phones, and then the people in the office, so that we could really focus on, the check-in person could really focus on all the check-in stuff and making those patient interactions and relationships, and the checkout person could do the same. So they still had to answer phones, but it wasn't their primary thing. And the noise level went down and the chaos went down because we had farmed that out. So, like you hear the call centers around the world, like we had our own call center in South Carolina. It was just a 1-person thing. But so it was really lovely. And we were really sad when she opted to, I think she just missed being in an office. Yeah. And so earlier this year, when we were kind of looking at, we need some help. And Fridays tend to be our busiest days. And I was like, let me just ask her. And so, hey, if you ever, and she was like, yes, because it's more income for her. And so on Fridays, I think for her, we want our phone starting to be answered at 7 a.m. Well, she's on the East Coast. So it's 8 a.m. for her. Her kid's in school.
Yeah.
So she's got this Friday where she wasn't working, and now it's easy. She's in her pajamas. She logs in. And she does an 8 to 1. And I think for her, then we kind of worked out a daily rate for her for those hours. And so she's happy, we're happy. And yet, again, another inadvertent audit, because she's answering the phones and people are trying to schedule and trying to figure out, why did the doctor recommend this, et cetera, et cetera. So she's having to read through all the notes. And if the story doesn't add up, so it's really enhanced documentation.
Yes.
And it's really, again, taken the noise and chaos out of the office on Fridays. So I can't think of something it's such a win-win. I can't think of anything that I'm going, oh man, this was a dumb decision. Not at all. It's been a beautiful decision. And then we had, and we've alluded to this in one of the earlier podcasts as well, another employee that I worked with very closely at my first office. And she's now in another office, but they also don't work. I think they work 1 Friday a month or whatever it is. And her kids are out of the house. And so I said, if you ever wanted to work remote, let us know, because she's one that's done front, she's done back. So I would actually put her first on phones because she can answer all of those questions. And then I could put her on verifying insurance and let the AR person have more time to fight insurance while this one verifies. So the sky was the limit. In the end, we didn't end up procuring her because of issues on our end, where we did have team members that are like, no, she needs to be in the office for this. And I kind of took that. I wish I had pushed more and said, no. And so this is why I love the remote employee, because to me, it's one less person, and the more people you have in the office, that's more characters having to interact and get along. So if you can decrease that, then it's fewer people that have to, fewer personalities and few, it's less interactions in that regard. The other thing I love about it is I think people love the idea of working from home.
Yes.
Pre-pandemic, especially
Especially
post-pandemic.
afterwards. Yeah.
So for me, I'm trying to figure out if every employee could have a day at home. Some of the assistants or hygienists were more proficient on the phone or more proficient with detailed entering. And we've talked about our assistants. Our assistants in particular are very thrive on and excel at the personal interactions. None of our assistant team is detailed, and they really get bogged down in these kind of more boring tasks of being on the phone and the documentation and all of that. But if I had one that was really good, I might even say on slow days, you go home and you work from home and you catch up on all your overdue hygiene calls, overdue treatment calls, catch up on whatever. There's always something to be done. And so I think people just love the idea of being able to work from home.
It's an added perk for them.
Yes.
And it costs us nothing. I think that's what's beautiful about it is it's one of these, I mean, people coming back after the pandemic, it was, I miss being home. I didn't realize, but I really enjoy being home. And so even if they had never thought about a work from home day or something like that, it's much more common now because for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, however long people were closed, they figured out what to do with themselves at home and kind of enjoyed that. So it is an added perk. They make their same hourly rate. So that may be something that we need to kind of asterisk here is they're not making less from home. They're making their same hourly rate. There's that trust factor there that they're going to be efficient. And to your point, they get to stay in their pajamas, get caught up. So they're mentally recharged the next day that they're back in the office. And it's really cost you nothing. It's cost you the same. It just means that we have to ensure that the schedule can run without them in the office that day.
Yeah. So I love, and I think that I'm sure there was more to it than that, but from what I can remember, the one that we didn't procure, that was maybe the sticking point where I was kind of hands off. I let the team leads work with it, and they decided that we didn't have a computer for her to log into, and that was going to be a problem. Therefore, she needed to be in the office. And so, of course, I was hands off. I didn't realize what was being communicated to her. Why I didn't get into the details of all of that, and suddenly she wasn't joining us, and I was like, what happened? Well, we need her in the office, and we told her this is not a remote position, and I was like, the whole premise was the remote position. I don't want her in the building, and she drives from far, but I don't even need her in the building. The tasks that I'm asking her to do would talk to this parent, talk to that, but those are all done better if she was here. Where would we put her to have some of these conversations? And I said, so why did she have to be in the building again? What am I missing? We don't have a computer for her to remote into. I just about lost my mind. I was like, are you crazy? Like, I would have spent money on that computer.
Yeah. $1,000 on a computer.
Max, less than that, honestly. And so I was really annoyed at myself for not catching that before it was too late.
Yeah.
So now to the other one that I think is really, kind of what you wanted me to talk about, the creativity, or whatever the right word is for our last hourly or remote employee, excuse me. So she has been with me pretty much since the beginning of the office. And so we've had kind of our ups and downs where there's probably times where I'm like, she doesn't seem to line up with what I'm wanting anymore, and maybe we need to part ways. Although more often than not, I think it was her. Yeah. Kind of going, this may not be what I want. And so for me, that hurts my feelings. Like, she must hate me. I must have done something to her, and she wants to get out of here. And it took me a long time. I mean, I'm sure that probably still could be part of it. But it's probably too, I forget that, they're young. When she started with me, she was probably 23 years old, something like that. And so, already in her own life, I think she probably did see herself at one point going to college and doing all this. She's one of the smartest people I know, but then ended up getting married and had a baby, but then went through a divorce and single mom. And so life just hit. And so I think for me going, okay, I might be part of the problem, but I'm not the sole problem. Right. So really it's kind of, what do you want? So I want to say at year 2, 3, 4, something like that, initially she said, I want to be an office manager. And I envision us having 3-4 practices, and I'm running all of the practices. And I'm like, okay, I don't know who would want that job, but apparently you do. Well, okay, then you're going to have to lead me there, because I've never had this vision of having multiple practices. I'm very overwhelmed in this one practice. So, but if I have somebody who I can follow, then I'll follow you. Tell me where we're going.
Yeah.
And she's very capable of making that happen. But then suddenly she didn't want to be the manager. And we've had that happen a couple of times. So the first time that I can really remember it happening, she said something about how she was wanting to go to paralegal school. And I said, paralegal school? What, like, why? Where did that come from? And I think for her, she was like, is this it for me? And at this point, she's probably 25-ish, 26 maybe. And she's like, this is it. This is where I'm going to spend my life, in a dental office. Like, that's just not what she had on her
envision
radar.
For her.
And so I heard her and everything. And I said, I hear where you're going with this. And I'm certainly not trying to dissuade you if, like, that's what you need to do. But after, I'm about 10-ish years older than you. And I do have a degree. And I do have, things that I have accomplished. And every damn day I'm going, is this it for me? Like, even now, even 10 years later now, since that conversation, is this it? I just have to keep going back to this office every day. Like, what else am I doing here? Where's this going? Yesterday I was in my full day accounting meeting. Shout out to Moss Luce Womble.
Yes.
Love them. Beautiful new building. Chris, you are a godsend. We love you. Anyway, so that's we were talking about at minimum retirement age for me. If I got lucky, could I retire in 12 to 15 years? And I just let that sink in, and I was like, where's your vomit bucket? Because I'm gonna throw up. I've got to keep doing this every day. And not that I don't love doing what I'm doing, but just when you think about it in the
long term, in years.
Yes. And I'm like, oh my God. I've been doing this, my own practice thing for what now, 11 to 12 years?
Yeah.
I feel like I've aged so much, and I'm this dried out prune. Like, my brain has not left. I got to do this for 12 more. I'm only halfway there. I need a minute. The bile is rising, right? So I could totally relate to where she was coming from. And I said, so you're at a point now where you're going, I don't have a degree, and I thought I would have a degree. And, and I said, but I do have a degree, and we're in the exact same boat.
Yeah.
Like, both of us are going, is this all life has to offer? Like, this is... And I said, what's going to happen with paralegal is similar to what's going to happen here. You're going to go learn a new trade, and you're going to get really good at it, and you'll probably have 2, 3, 4, 5 years. But then what?
Yeah. Yeah.
When you're 30 and you're in the same place.
Yeah.
You've reached the peak of what you can do with paralegal. That's it. Nowhere else to go. So kind of like here, I mean, once you get to office manager status, I don't really kind of know where else to go here. And you already know this field. Yeah. So really up to you, but I guess I don't see it. Like, to me, it's a parallel move. It's not a different move. So, but I left it alone because I was like, well, I don't want to project my thoughts onto her. Like, you're a smart lady. You'll figure out what you need to do. Well, then paralegal went out the door, and I don't know when and why that moved on. I don't know what her epiphany was at that moment. But she stayed. And then I think right before the pandemic, right? So the year before the pandemic, or, about a year leading up to, she hit me with, well, can I talk to you? And whatever she was saying. And she's like, well, really for my lifestyle with my kid at home, and can I, really want to work 4 days in the office and 1 day out. And I was like, I think that's totally fine. Again, we've done this remote thing a few times now. So I was like, that'd be really good. And she's a very intense person, and she's a very intelligent person. So it's hard for her to continually clean up the mess of the others that aren't maybe so focused on planning and the details. And so she was kind of cranky in the office. Like, I would hide from her too, because, she was kind of intimidating. She's a choleric, right? Yeah. So I'm like, ugh, she's mad at me today. I'm going to go hide in my office. Go tuck her over there in that corner. So I was like, yes, great idea. Let's do 1 day remote. So that was probably 2 years before the pandemic. And then the year before.
Well, and also we kind of saw this writing on the wall happening, which was when we transitioned into the team lead model to kind of minimize some of the stress we felt like, I think you and I both had this worry that she was burning out due to some of these conversations.
So that was even a few years before this. Yeah. So this was probably, 5 years ago, maybe?
Yeah. So at this point,
yeah.
she's, 2 years prior to pandemic, she's sharing some of the management responsibilities, but still is wanting a change.
Yes.
So anyway, just to make sure that listeners know, there's lots of little transitions that have happened to retain this employee. And all of those transitions happened at various points on the scale. But the whole time, I think it's beautiful for me to sit here and think about it because I know all that went into retention of this employee. And the retention wasn't just to advantage you, the practice owner. It also advantaged her as well. It was very advantageous for her. And I think what we'll get to now, now is very beneficial for her. She loves the position that she's in, and we've kind of found that spot that is win-win. But there's been a lot of transitions that have happened up to that.
And so to say, did we achieve this remote position for her and now we've returned? I'm sure a lot of life happened. Her kid's older now. He's a teen. And so over the years, as she's thinking, I want to be a manager, and then having to deal with all the issues that a manager has to deal with, and then getting burnt out by that and going, I don't know what I was thinking with wanting 3 or 4 practices. Like, I don't even want to manage this one. So we had that transition, which is then when we came to the team captain idea that we had implemented and we still have, that we had talked about in a previous podcast. So we had that transition, and then, she'd do okay for a little while, and then suddenly I'm like, she's extra intense. Like, what is going on? And again, for me to talk to her was always intimidating for me because 2 reasons. One is that choleric intensity of hers. From my viewpoint, I'm a people pleaser. So I was afraid that I would walk into something that either my own feelings would get hurt, or I'd promise her the moon and I wouldn't be able to deliver, or that it wouldn't be fair, or that I'd get talked into, going, oh yeah, do whatever you want to. And like, would she have me by my balls again?
Yeah.
Like, that was always what I was afraid of, was I don't want to be in that position of you hold all the cards. And so I was very reluctant to go into those conversations. You and I finally had a moment where I think I revealed to you, where I was just like, I'm petrified of her walking away, but I want to be in a position where if she chooses to walk away, that I still need to be okay.
Right.
And that's when you said to me, you're like, Kuba, you'll be okay. I'm like, what do you mean? What's all the back work you had been doing for me with other team members and things like that I wasn't really paying attention to. And you said, no, if she were to walk away tomorrow, this is what we would be doing. These people have been trained to do this. These people have stepped up to do that. So we have a backup model that I was even unaware of. And that's where I was like, every penny was well worth spent, and then some. Like, all this behind the scenes work had been going on, and unbeknownst to me, because I just wasn't, maybe at that point my kids were young and I was distracted. Anyway, so we crutched along and she was okay, and then here we go again. Suddenly she wasn't okay. Mom issues, family issues, I don't know.
Yeah.
And so at that point too, I was like, she's gonna walk. She doesn't want to be here. Like, she may be moving. Who knows? And then, so paralegal stuff went away, and then now suddenly she was like, oh well, I need this. I will eventually need to be just 4 days a week because I'm going to massage therapy. I'm getting, and I said, oh, okay, so what does that mean? Are you doing massages in the evening, but you still want your day job? And she goes, well, I think I'm going to stay for a little bit, get my, I think this was like January, February of whatever year it was. And she was, by the end of that year is when she would finish getting her license. And then into the next year, by that summer, she'd probably leave the office. So, again, that was a blow to my stomach, but I said, you know what? Like, I shouldn't hold you back. If this is not what you wanted for yourself, I need to not take that personally, and we need to move on. And that to me just means that you're going to move on to other things, and the right person will come in, or we'll shift and adapt, and it'll all be okay.
Right.
Just kept telling myself that. So fast forward then, she got her massage stuff at the end of that year, and then the beginning of the next year, which I believe was 2020.
I think so.
Yes. So it was the pandemic year.
Yeah.
And I knew this was coming, and she hadn't said anything. So this was in January of 2020. And I said, hey, what are your plans? Like, what are you wanting to do? And she said, well, I was going to plan on resigning in June and then probably pick up job at a front desk in a dental office 2 days a week close to my house and then do my massages. And I thought, okay, well, again, kind of hurt my feelings a little bit but then I thought about it and I said, okay, could I make this a win-win for both? And so what I need to figure out is, are you done with dental altogether? Because she would, she can do just about anything in the office, but maybe you're burnt out on that and you're starting to, maybe you just want to be the person that kind of just answers the phone and schedules and really don't want to do anything more than that. That's your transition out. Or are you just done with me? If you want to stay in dental, or are you done with Kuba? Have you, you've been here almost 10 years. You're done with all of working with me in particular. And so you're going to go pick up in another office and do that. Or is this just really a stepping stone to launch you into your massage world? So it really has nothing to do with dental or Kuba. So what do you want? And so I just kind of had a very direct conversation with her. And I said, this is what I'm thinking.
Right.
By the way, she's a very private person. I know having worked with her for over 10 years, I know very little about her private life. And I've always appreciated her professionalism in that regard. So I just had to be very direct though, because I knew if I put it any other way, I wasn't going to get much. And I said, so from my viewpoint, I could see this, or maybe you're leaving dental altogether. I don't know what your plans are. However, if you want to stay in if you want hours in some capacity, let me know, because there's a ton she could do with marketing. There's a ton she could do with, again, answer phones some. If you don't want to be involved in patient care at all, maybe you verify the insurance. Maybe we train you on how to post payments. Like,
plus she was a great person that you punted ideas to a lot, and then she would kind of take that and go, okay, great, let me get you some details on that. So she was oftentimes the executor of your ideas, which was, I think, part of what that's hard to replace.
Yes.
So the other things, can we find a marketing person? Can we find somebody that stores the HR documents and all that? Yeah, we could supplement all of that. But that 10 years of development where y'all have kind of developed this communication that was so easy between the two of you, I think that's where we were going to miss her.
Yeah. And where she had the history of the office. So I don't have a memory for anything. So where I could say, hey, I think we've had this idea before, but it didn't work. Do you remember why? And she could say, yes, this is why we did this and this and this. So and I think we balance each other very well. I'm a quick start, in Colby world. That means that yes, let's go, bam. And I don't often think about all of the details, and she's the opposite. So it's like we need each other to keep moving and get something going successfully. And we've done it very well. So I was like, I'm going to miss that part of my brain because she knows so much, and she knows how I'm going to react to certain things. I know how she's going to react. So it was just this relationship that I was like, ugh, that's going to be very difficult to start over with a lot of those things. So I just said, well, think about what you want to do. If you want 5 hours a week, I will give you 5 hours a week, assuming you're not done with Kuba in this office. You want whatever. So I just said, really, I need you to tell me if you want to stay in any capacity, which may help you not have to pick up another job. You could do it from the leisure of your home. And I trust that you're capable of doing all of these tasks. So you would basically just give me a list of tasks that you would anticipate taking over and what time you're willing to give. And then I'll come back with you, counter offer and see if we can get in the same place. And so I didn't hear from her for a couple of days to a week. And I kind of was like, what does this mean?
What's the plan?
But she was working on it and going, I think I want, and I did tell her, I said, let me just remind you, if you drop down to part-time, you don't qualify for 401k. You don't qualify for this bonus. You don't qualify for this. I'm not trying to sway you one way or the other. I'm sure you've thought of all of that if you were going to go work for another office. She's so smart. She hadn't thought of all of that.
Yeah.
Now, if I wanted to be a jerk, I could say, well, you're going to clock in no more than 30 hours.
Right. Stay part-time.
Yeah, stay part-time. So that way I'm getting everything I need, but then she doesn't qualify for all these other things. And I know that as a human, that would make me bitter.
Yeah.
I'm so close yet
that
so
doesn't
far.
show that you value her.
Right. It seems like I'm trying to take advantage of her. So I left out. I said, if you want to be full-time, but tell me what you're going to do that's going to help the office, going to keep you happy with tasks you're doing, and then help me with things that we need done, that I know whatever you're going to do it to perfection as far as my definition of perfection goes. So,
well, and we went so far as to say, build your job description.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
if you want full-time remote, build your job description, put it on paper and tell us what you want to do. And I think there was that trust factor with her to know that she was going to put together a stellar job description. And even though we couldn't think of what all she would do, 32 hours a week, we knew that if she could, she would put together a job description that made sense for us.
Right. And that's the thing. I think for her, she was also not doing it to benefit herself. She
Right.
knew at the front desk, they're going to struggle with this, this, this. So I would take this, but I would leave this because that makes more sense for bodies in the office to do this. So, I mean, it worked beautifully. And so she ended up staying full time, for 64 hours pay period.
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, so we did all of that prior to shutdown. Mind you, my mindset the year of the pandemic, because wasn't it all starting at the end of 2019?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, like, that's a disease of overseas. There's no way. I was just even when we were talks of being shut down, I was like, there's no way we're going to be shut down. We're going to be shut down for 2 days and the economy's not going to be able to handle it. We'll bounce back. Like, there's no way this is going to. So I, ate crow or whatever the verbiage is there. But to me, at that point, this was probably in January, we were having all these discussions. And by February, she was gone bye-bye. Like, I was like, why are we waiting till June? Go now.
Yeah.
Again, she was a very intense person. So from my viewpoint, it was a win-win all around because a lot of the team was very intimidated by her. And so to have her out of the office was a benefit.
Yeah.
She was thrilled because she thought she was only going to get 1 day work from home. Well, now she's at home full-time. All of these tasks have been farmed out, and so it just couldn't have worked out more beautifully. And then 6 weeks later, we were shut down. And it's like we already had everything in place. Yeah. She didn't miss a beat, so she could stay on payroll and handle phone calls and handle everything. I furloughed everybody else. I left one who came into the office to help manage things in the office. And that one too, one of my other team leads, she doesn't have kids. She wants to work. And so I pay her, she's a hygienist. When she's at home working from home, she picks up, we agreed upon a admin rate for her. So like most Mondays we're not working, but if she wants to work from home and she's very capable of knocking out this, she does it from home.
Yeah.
So even though she is an employee who's there 4 days a week, she's still there the 5th day or in evenings handling things that she's got nothing else to do in the evening a lot of times, according to her.
And again, these are people that you trust because they have proven themselves to be very effective, efficient. They're not wasting time on the clock. And so I can imagine somebody listening that's like, oh, I'd never trust somebody to just clock in whenever you want from home, from, administratively and churn things out. But this has been developed over time that these people are very, very trustworthy. It also provides this flexibility that is so necessary now in the job market. You've got a hygienist on your team, this team lead, that has her 4 days of a week of clinical, she's seeing patients, but she really wants to work 5 days a week. Sometimes if she's trying to save up for a trip or something like that, she'll work 6 days a week. And you've allowed some of that flexibility. Sure, it's not at a hygiene rate, but she's got that flexibility to earn additional income even when the office is closed. So that in and of itself is a creative retention strategy for that employee and gives her a luxury that is very nice to have.
Especially during the pandemic and the shutdown is kind of like before and after, obviously not during the shutdown, but for her to supplement her income, she was going to go work at Costco.
Yeah.
And so she was going to be making, I think, $11 an hour at Costco, and I paid her a higher admin rate. So she loved it even more. She didn't have to get out of her house and go to Costco. She just logs in from home.
Yeah.
And like you said, I've got to have trust that she's not just going to ride the clock and say she did all these things. But she's very dedicated to the office and has proven that long before we've had her. But it was one of those things where, yes, somebody's leaving, or now this person that wasn't a good fit on the team. Now we've got to hire another one. And she's like, well, why can't I do it? I'm like, well, I'm not paying hygiene fees for an admin job. Well, I'll do it from home and negotiate a rate for me. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
And then we've even offered that to the other two hygienists at times that, like you said, at times where they want to earn more for a trip and they don't need a ton, but Christmas is coming up and they want a little extra cash. Okay, well then why don't you come in on this date? We'll do half hygiene rate and you work the
unscheduled treatment list or recall list.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Again, the things that are being tasked with these elective extra hours are things that will absolutely benefit the practice. It should always be a win-win-win. We don't want somebody, working from home doing something that is a minimal impact to the practice. But all of these remote positions that we just talked about, there were things that were absolutely impactful, even if it was just the Friday person that we added just answering the phones. Which you're like, how valuable is that? Exceedingly valuable, especially on Fridays, because our 2 front office people were stressed to the max. They were delivering, care to the patients that were directly in front of them, but they're constantly distracted by this phone. They were much more effective in their communication on top of things because of this one thing that we added to this remote person's place. So even that is super valuable. So I think that's when we talk about all of these kind of retention or creative strategies to keep an employee on our team, even if it doesn't feel super valuable, or you're like, yeah, this task list looks good, but how much is it actually impacting the practice? Even if it's just reducing the stress of your team in the practice and they're able to deliver more positive care to the patient and more clear communication.
And make less mistakes.
Yeah, it's totally worth it.
Now, for people going, well, then how do I prevent everybody coming to me and saying they want to work remote? So my answer to that, if somebody's saying, well, why can't I this or why can't I that? My answer to them always is, well, tell me what you think you could do for me remote.
Mm-hmm.
You build it, you bring it to me, then we talk about it. Because
Mm-hmm.
I want them to shoulder that burden.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're a chair side. You're great at all things chair side, but you can't leave any document. Even the chair side treatment you worked on, you still typed in the wrong tooth.
Right.
And I know we extracted B and not A. I know you saw that, and yet you marked A in the chart. So I don't think those details are your strong point. So you tell me what you would be successful with doing remotely, and I will absolutely consider it.
Mm-hmm.
And I will. But we all know, for a lot of these people, that's
not an option.
that's not an option.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to say no. I'm going to say, you present it to me and tell me what you can do and show me your level of proficiency. And if you understand all the nuances of what this means, they come to the conclusion themselves that that may not be the right role for them.
Yeah. And surprisingly, as strong as we are with remote workers on your team, we really haven't had people coming and asking for that. And it's a heavier than most offices remote team. You've got your AR person remote. You've got your pre-manager that then moved into a different role. She's fully remote now. We've got our Friday remote person. So it's a lot of remote workers, and then your other hygienist team lead that will periodically work remotely. And yet nobody has really presented that as a desire of theirs. So even in that, if that's a worry that prevents a practice owner from considering this, it's very much a part of the culture in your office, and yet people aren't asking for that. So I don't think that should prevent us from thinking about this option. Awesome. Thanks for diving in with me on this conversation. I hope, listeners, that if you are considering, how to creatively staff your office, that thinking outside the box in this way might be an area that is worth diving into a little bit further. So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for joining the conversation today. We hope that you are comforted in knowing that you are not alone, but we also hope that you're walking away with some really great tips and tricks to try in your practice. We value your feedback, so please take a few moments to rate and review the podcast. Finally, we want to make sure that we're covering the topics that matter to you. So track us down on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let us know what topics you want us to cover. As always, please know that we are rooting for you today as you manage your dental drama.